In this video, we're going to be looking over this Minolta SRT 202 35mm SLR camera body. Now, this is a camera that I have a certain amount of familiarity with because my family bought brand new a Minolta SRT 201 camera back in 1979, and I used it a lot after that. Now, the 201 was just a minor step down from the 202, and just to quickly go over what the differences are, the 202 has this extra little bumped out section in the front, and you'll notice there's a little optic lens right there, and what that does is allow you to look right at the number on the aperture ring that you can see while your eye is at the viewfinder and back. So rather than having to look away from the camera and look at what your ring is set at, you can just see it right through here, and that's very handy. The other feature that's on here is this little window that says film, and I believe that that changes when you have film in there and you can see it moving, and you can verify that there's film in the camera when you're using it. Other than that, they seem to be identical. And this camera is fully mechanical. There is a place for a battery on here, and you can take that out using a nickel is a good key to get that door off, and that little battery cover off. And you can see the battery compartment is nice and clean. The only purpose of this battery is to run the meter in the camera, and I found that with this camera I could not make the meter operate at all. The meter needle just stayed stuck up. And so what I've understood that to mean is that there's some foam in there that the needle gets stuck against, and it just stays there regardless of whether you put it in battery check mode or on mode here, where you should be able to see that needle move, and I just couldn't. Now, the good news is you can still use this camera without that meter by using a pocket handheld meter, or maybe even an app for your phone that serves as a light meter, and just transfer the settings from there to your aperture ring on the lens, if there were one here, and your shutter speed here based on the ASA or ISO value of your film, and take your pictures. Let's start looking at some things here on the front that are important to check out. First, we can take this body cap off and see in the mirror box here. Lots of these cameras, you'll see a little bit of paint missing, or a little bit of dinging right in this area here, and that's because the Minolta lenses have a little prong on the bottom, and if you try and stick the lens on there without first lining up the red dots, you could hit that right there, and it looks like some people have done that. It's purely cosmetic, doesn't make any difference, but you can be aware of that. The aperture follower ring, you want that to be free and sprung over to the left like this, so that's good. This camera has a stop-down preview feature here, and the bottom button here that I push, you can see this lever moves over to the side. Now, this one has the type where you have to push and hold it and view your image through the viewfinder with the lens stop down, and then when you release it, it comes off. Some of the SRT series cameras had a locking type. We'd push it once to lock it and then push it again to take it off, but this one is just push, look, and release. The self-timers on these cameras can get gummed up and not run smoothly, so we're going to check that here. Now pull that down, and then we're going to make sure that the shutter is cocked, and then we can initiate the timer by just pushing that little button down right there, and we can see that the timer is running smoothly, and it will complete its cycle, and we'll watch here. So that tells us that the timer is in good condition. The other thing we want to look at here is up on top, and this is our shutter speed dial It's also what we use to set the ASA value, or more commonly now ISO, but it's the same. You pull up on this and you can rotate that and set it anywhere from 6400 all the way down to 6 based on your film speed. But most commonly it's going to be somewhere around 200. Another thing to look at here is this tip on the film advance lever. This one is a nice one. It's actually the later style. There was a little bit different design of this up through the SRT 101 series. This one is a little bit nicer, and it's attached well, and oftentimes these are broken away and gone, so that's a good thing to look for. Let's check out some mechanics here now while we have this here. We're going to make sure it's cocked, and we're going to step down through these shutter speeds starting at 1/1000th of a second, 1/500th, 1/250th, 1/125th, 1/60th, 1/30th, 1/15th, 1/8th, 1/4th, 1/2, and 1 full second. And that sounded pretty good. If you're going to encounter one of these that has problems with the shutter mechanism, it will be very apparent at this 1 second setting. So let's listen to this again. That sounded very smooth and seems to be working well. If we switch to the bulb setting, then the shutter stays open and the mirror stays up as long as I hold the button down, and then it completes the cycle when I let up. That could also be done using a cable release screwed into the shutter button, where you can hold it away from the camera so you're not jiggling the camera while you're pushing and releasing the button. So that all looks good. One other thing I didn't point out here is this is the lens release button here, and I did verify that when I had a lens on there I could push that and it would release and it would lock properly. So that feature works. You really can't test that completely without a lens on the camera, because you do not need that to get the lens cap or the body cap on and off. Okay, one other thing here on the top of this camera is this film rewind crank, and this is a nice metal one. It's in good condition on this one. And before I pull up on this, we're going to look here. Here is the film counter window through all of the times that we actuated the shutter. It's counted up here. And if I pull up on this, it opens the back of the camera, and it also resets this counter. So that's working properly. While we have this open, we're going to watch for a couple of things. We're going to watch for the film advance mechanism over here, and that's working. Then we're going to watch the shutter right here, and we can set that at some other setting. But everything seems to be working well as far as the film advance. There's one thing that we want to check here on the bottom. There's a little button right here, and that is for rewind. When you've reached the end of the roll, on this type of camera, you have to wind the film back into the metal cartridge before you open the camera. And so if we push this in, figuring it's the end of the roll, if you push it in hard enough, it will latch up like that, and then this sprocket wheel will spin back freely, so that as film is going back into the cartridge as you're winding it with this crank, this will not provide any resistance. Then, when you load a new roll of film into the camera and you start advancing this, that button should pop out, and it did, and this will no longer spin backwards. It will only go forward as you work the film advance. So that's all working. The door latch is good, and that's nice. Let's open it one more time here. One thing I always like to look at is these door edges to see how much light seal material has come off of the places where it's loaded in here in these channels here. and I feel a little bit here. It's dry, and it's not a lot of it. I would think that it would still be light tight, but it's one of those things that when you have one of these cameras looked at and worked on by a camera repairman, those light seals often should be replaced. And this camera, being from probably about 1975 to 77, I suppose, it's getting up there in age, and it probably needs that. So I hope what I've done here is looked at all of the things that you would want to do if you were holding this camera in your hands, checking out the things that you can if you found it out in the wild. And this, in my opinion, this is a camera that would be worthy of restoration and use. Whether or not you have the meter fixed, that would be something that would be done as part of your service. But be aware that with these batteries, there is a battery that is still made that will fit this compartment, but the voltage is slightly different than it was back in the 70s. And if you put that battery in and trust the meter, your exposures will be off. And I know that from experience with my other camera. So you may be better off just using a separate meter. There are some ways to compensate for that, and there's lots of things on the internet that discuss how to use the meters on these SRT cameras that use that. But other than that, this is just a bulletproof, tough camera. Cosmetically pretty nice. I don't see any dents on the corners. There's some scuffs and scrapes here and there. Almost all of these will have some scrapes right here and here due to how people wore straps, and if they had things that tended to abrade metal, you'll get little marks like that. They're just cosmetic and not a big deal. So that is my walk around of this SRT 202. I would rate the condition as quite good mechanically, except I could not make that meter work, and that may or may not be important depending on how the next owner is going to use this camera. Probably could use some light seals, though I wouldn't think it's absolutely necessary to do it right away. And otherwise, put a lens on it and it should be okay. Thank you for watching.